Well, let's add some light to the subject. Let's turn up the lights, and I'll ask you all to come into the aisles. Let's have our ushers in the aisles with microphones, and we're calling for brave people now. There you go.
I'm sure you have lots of questions.
To be, just emotionally open in front of 700 people. So, how are we doing?
Got somebody there. We're just waiting for a mic, I guess.
Is there a question
There's
there?
a mic there.
Or over here?
Oh, hi. I'm wondering if you could talk more about equity and accessibility of these substances, especially in the treatment medical model, because arguably the people that are struggling with why we have a mental health crisis are people that don't have access to mental health treatment.
Yeah, it's a great question. The reason FDA approval is so important is that it will improve access because it will presumably make it available to people with health insurance and Medicaid and Medicare. And that's a long road, but that is the path toward making it more available. Working with an underground guide can cost thousands of dollars. And if some of it's profiteering because the demand is so high, but it's a lot of hours on the part of these experienced therapists. On one level, psilocybin therapy should be very cheap because it's not hard to grow these mushrooms and they're not expensive to buy. The expensive piece is the therapy. I think that there are a lot of people being trained right now to do psychedelic therapy, and that the number of therapists will increase dramatically. It's estimated we're going to need something like 10,000 trained psychedelic therapists in the next 10 years. Hopefully, as there's a greater number of therapists, the prices will come down. But it's not going to be cheap, and I think we really have to depend on insurance to make it available in this guided way to as many people as possible. It's the equity problem we have throughout the system. It's no different. The only thing that's hopeful is that if people want to move to a more do-it-yourself model with friends helping friends, the mushrooms are not expensive at all.
Well, and thank you for keeping your questions short. Let's go over here, please.
Hello. I have a kind of a strange question regarding psychedelics, and you mentioned the dissolution of ego. So as we're going through life, oftentimes our ego is fluctuating as we're getting older, and sometimes we have areas where our ego is very strong and sometimes where it's not as strong. I've done a type of meditation called Vipassana, which is a type of meditation where you stay silent for 10 days. And throughout that, they say sometimes you'll have several breakthroughs, but sometimes you'll get back to a part of your life where your ego may actually be stronger than what it was. Would psychedelics sometimes work the same way?
Yes. We talked a lot about ego dissolution, but they're egomaniacs who have there's ego inflation that does happen. Think of Timothy Leary. He's a great example of someone whose ego was vastly enlarged by his involvement with psychedelics. What can happen is some people, and this is in the history of mystical experiences, feel that they have found the key to the universe and the ultimate meaning and the cure for all problems and salvation, and they've met God. And so yes, without question, there are people who come out of the experience with inflated egos, dangerously inflated egos. So we have to add that to our list of risks.
Do we have somebody over here?
Hello, I was wondering if there's any research about using psychedelics with autism or any, the spectrum, any part of that spectrum.
That's a really good question.
What your thoughts might be on that.
There was a trial done at UCLA a few years ago by a researcher named Charles Grobe, if you want to look it up, where he gave MDMA to people, high-functioning autistic people with social anxiety. And they were young people, 20s, I think. And it was very helpful in helping them make bonds with other people. One of the things that happens with MDMA, and I don't know that this was his explanation, but this is one plausible explanation, is that there is a release of several neurotransmitters and hormones, but one is oxytocin, which is sometimes called the love hormone. It's what is released when nursing a baby or during sex, and it creates a very strong bond. And given that some autistic people have trouble making bonds with people, there are some other autistic experiments, I think, underway right now, but MDMA would be probably the substance to explore with regard to autism. The critical periods discussion may be relevant. Some people think that autism is caused by a premature closing of a critical period for bonding. You'd have to give it to quite young people, which raises lots of ethical issues. But Gul Dolan has talked about autism as something that might be amenable to this kind of approach.
Over here, please. Go ahead.
Hello, I'm very excited to read your new book. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about microdosing psilocybin over maybe 3 times a week or something like that, how you feel about it, and is it useful?
Yeah, so one of the ways people are using psychedelics now, which is fairly new, it didn't happen in the 60s as far as I know, is taking a tiny dose, a tenth of an active dose. So in the case of LSD, it would be 10 micrograms instead of 100 micrograms. And it's like point something grams of psilocybin, and doing it a couple times a week. You can't do it every day because you'll build up a tolerance to it. And people report improved mood, better productivity, creativity. But so far, we don't have any research to really back that up. It may well be true, all these reports, but it may also be a placebo effect. I mean, if you think about it, the placebo effect is always positive. It has a lot of power. And you add to that LSD or psilocybin, and you have a kind of super duper placebo effect, since we impute so much magic to those particular molecules. So until I just read of a trial on microdosing that is being started at Imperial College. I don't know much about the design of it. There was a kind of, it's a hard study to do because IRBs, institutional review boards at institutions that have to approve studies, and the FDA has to approve it too. And the whole idea of giving any LSD to somebody and then sending them on their way, which you'd have to do unless you were going to keep them sequestered for a month, which you can't afford to do, is just hard to get approval for. So one of the studies was they taught a group of microdosers how to blind themselves and how to take their LSD and create capsules, some that had LSD, some that had sugar pills, and they put a code and told them how to mix them, and anyway, they did this with 50 or 100 people to see if the days they took the real thing were different than the days they didn't. And there was no rhyme or reason. They did just as well on the placebo as on the LSD day. So that suggests maybe it's a placebo effect. Getting the amount right is a challenge too. Any 2 mushrooms can differ in intensity by a factor of 10. And if you feel it when you're microdosing, you're not microdosing. It should be sub-perceptual. So I don't know what to tell you. I mean, it certainly can't hurt. And if it does you good, great. Who cares? Who cares, if it's a placebo? And by the way, placebo effects work even when you know it's a placebo. If a guy in a white coat gives you a pill, here's a sugar pill, it's going to help your back. It will help your back.
Where do you get these materials? Can you get them on
Sugar
the
pills?
No,
I think they're called Skittles. I don't know.
that would be safe, but where can you get LSD or mushrooms?
Well, this
with
is
some-
the surprise of the night. Reach under your chair. I can't help you with that. For me, it was a challenge. I mean, you age out of having a drug dealer. But
I guess
friends,
going on the internet and being careful. And
but this is the thing. This is the age of fentanyl, right? And that's a big risk, especially with synthetics like MDMA. I mean, and if you do buy something from someone you don't know, you can get it tested. You can buy test kits, or there are places there you can mail drugs and get them safely tested and returned to you. Dance Safe is is a harm reduction organization. So there are ways around it, but there are cases where things are contaminated with fentanyl these days, and that can kill you. There's a real gift culture I found among people who use psychedelics, partly because the mushrooms are so cheap. But I don't know. In this whole time I was doing this work, I don't think I bought a single thing except paying for guides who supply it. So.
Over here, please. Go ahead.
Hi, good evening. I was just wondering if this kind of concept does take off, do you think there will be a medication out there like a Narcan for psychedelics?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Well, we already have them, apparently. I don't know this for a fact, but I've heard it several times that a sedative like Valium or an antipsychotic like Thorazine can end a trip almost instantaneously. And that I hear, and I don't have any proof of this, that guides will often have that on hand, so that there is a way to stop a trip with those kind of substances. So in a sense, it is a little like Narcan. Good question.
Yeah, over here, please. Go
Hello.
ahead.
My question's kind of long. So I just want to say that I love that you're advocating for the research of psychedelics. I've had my fair share of experimenting with psychedelics. I've had some really revolutionary experiences that changed my life for the better, but I've also had some really distressing ones. I experimented a little too hard, and which resulted in me being diagnosed with HPPD, which is hallucinating persisting perception disorder. I have multiple friends who also have complained about having negative effects from psychedelics, like hallucinations persisting for months. With that being said, you mentioned that revolutionary/intense trips are more essential than less significant trips, which I agree. But I was wondering, have you had any negative effects from doing it, or do you know anybody personally, or have you talked to anybody about HPPD?
Yeah, so HPPD is what we used to call, what was the common term for it? When you have these hallucinations that come back unbidden. Flashbacks, acid flashbacks, thank you. And it is a real phenomenon, and it's been studied. There are a couple papers about it. For some people, it's not as dramatic as that sounds. It's not like they're driving and suddenly they're, being attacked by a jaguar in the Amazon. It sometimes is a memory, but a very vivid memory. And I don't know to what extent you can control it. I don't know that much about it. But it is, I think, alarming to some people. But I have talked to many people who've had bad experiences. And again, there are two kinds of bad experiences. There are those dark night of the soul experiences that end up being incredibly productive. And many of the researchers will talk about challenging trips rather than bad trips. But then there are other experiences that are just bad. and leave people in a bad place, and that is a risk. I think it's mitigated when you're with a good guide. I think that there are things that they can do and say that reduce the chances of having those kind of adverse events. But I have heard, scary stories. I've heard of people who had to spend time in a psych ward after experiences. Sometimes it turns out that they took crazy doses or mixed different psychedelics together. But I'm not discounting what you're describing at all, and I think it's important that we talk about it. There was a recent study of adverse events that there's a free newsletter that I'm involved with called The Microdose, and it comes out of the Berkeley Psychedelics Center. If you go to psychedelics.berkeley.edu, you can sign up for free. And we covered that study. It was just a couple weeks ago. Jules Evans, I think, was the lead author. So there's more and more attention going to this, and I think it's really healthy. I don't think we've talked about risk in this movement nearly enough. So thank you for bringing that up.
Go ahead.
Hey, good evening. Thank you for being here, Michael. My question is kind of related to the previous one in terms of, in regards to integration. After people have these massive breakthrough experiences on high doses of whether it be psilocybin or 5-MeO-DMT, I think, like you said, aftercare and integration has not been highlighted nearly enough. And I've been working as a sacred medicine facilitator for 4 years, going on 4 years, and we have a variety of means to help people after these massive life-changing experiences. We found that community, people who have shared similar experiences, can be very helpful, and as well as having a spiritual practice that you go home to, mindfulness practice, whatever that looks like for you. What are your suggestions for people who may go home and have these experiences?
Well, thanks for sharing that. I think community is really important, and I think one of the healthy things that's going on right now is that people can have an open conversation about this, which was not true 5 years ago. And so people can share what happens instead of holding it inside and being alone with it. And so you're seeing there are psychedelic societies popping up all over the country, and these are not places people go to trade drugs. It's where they go to talk about their experiences. And I think it's a really effective institution. I do think in general, and this is true both in the university trials and in the underground, that integration is cursory too often, and that it can take a very long time to process a psychedelic experience thoroughly. And if you get 2 hours with a guide and then that's it, that may not be enough. And that's why these integration therapists do exist, I think, for people who, you can work through this material for years. There's a lot to work on. So many things can come up potentially. And if you have an experience, let's say you were not in touch with a childhood trauma you had, and it comes up in an ayahuasca experience or something, you're not going to work that out in 2 hours of integration. That's setting the agenda for potentially years of therapy. But is it better or worse that this came out now? It's probably better, but it's going to take attending to. So I don't know beyond that. I'm not a therapist, so it's hard for me to speak to what people need in the way of integration, except to say more of it and more skillful. And that's why the training of guides is so important. There are a lot of underground practitioners who are very good and have lots of experience, but now there's a whole generation of new guides who've really just had a 16-week course or something like that. And the quality of that training, I think, is going to be very important. So Thank you for sharing.
What about your institution, University of California, Berkeley? Can people find out about these psychedelic societies and integration practices?
If you want more information, we really have, public education is an important part of what we're doing. This is the Berkeley Center for the Science of Psychedelics, BCSP. It's at that website address I gave you, psychedelics.berkeley.edu. You will find there not only the newsletter, not only a primer on all the different substances, but also a link to a massive online course called Psychedelics in the Mind that a neuroscientist at Berkeley teaches, but there are a lot of guests. And it's either free or like $15. It's not a lot. And it's a really good introduction to a lot of the issues we're talking about. But anyway, it also, I think if it doesn't have the list of integration therapists or a link to that, my website does. I have a page on psychedelic resources at michaelpollan.com.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Hi. Thank you for sharing your experiences. So mine's kind of similar to the woman over there. My daughter is on the spectrum and has spent 20 years trying to kind of share how her brain works, and has said that it's, she kind of evolves in her own little world and is completely happy with it. Do you think these experiences are similar in that sense, so that you're allowed to kind of move on without being judged, so to speak, in the world?
That's a good question. I honestly don't know. I think there are people among us, especially young children, who don't need psychedelics. I have a colleague at Berkeley who's a developmental psychologist, and she's convinced that until the age of 4 or 5, or until we go to school, that kids are just tripping all the time. And she makes a good case. I mean, the kind of perception, she calls it lantern consciousness. It's taking in information from 360 degrees, but not narrowly focusing on anything, that we move into this very linear consciousness where we can stay focused, and indeed we're forced to learn it in school, closes down what had been this very free and flexible way of taking in information. And it looks a little disorganized to us, but it's very coherent to the kids, and they're learning a ton. And again, they're in a critical period, right? A critical learning period that shuts down. So it might well be something like that. It's very hard to know. It's very hard to put ourselves in the shoes of someone who is on the spectrum, or except with the help of art, right? I mean, with films and books and certainly, 4-year-olds don't write a lot of books, so we have to infer a lot about how they think. But this is a mode of consciousness that we're wired for, that there are other ways of getting to. I mean, we haven't talked that much about meditation, but there are a lot of similarities. People can get to these places other ways. There are a history of practices. And by the way, I'm going back to the adverse events point, the woman who's talking about meditation. I forgot to mention, a paper recently came out about adverse events in meditation retreats. And people can have really destabilizing experiences in those silent retreats that go unresolved. Or the retreat is over before they've resolved them. So it's, you're playing with consciousness. It's pretty serious stuff.
I think we have time for one more question. Go ahead.
Hey, I was wondering if you had any experience with non-serotonergic psychedelics. I was thinking the example with the belladonna, with the founder of AA, which I think is a muscarinic psychedelic.
Yeah, I haven't. Where would you put mescaline in that group or not? I guess that's serotonin.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I guess it's a serotonin active. No, I haven't. I mean, ketamine is not, but I haven't tried that yet. There's still a menu out there. Anyway, thank you. Thank you for your great questions. I really appreciate it.